Chunka Mui is a author and strategic advisor to large organizations on how and how not to innovate. He's the co-author of 4 books, including the bestseller Unleashing the Killer App, Digital Strategies for Market Dominance. In 2005, the Wall Street Journal named this book one of the 5 best books on business and the internet. Chunka is a regular contributor to Forbes.com. Among his widely read columns on disruptive innovation is a 6-part feature series on driverless cars. He holds a BS in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT. Please help me welcome Chunka Mui.
Thank you. So we've talked a lot about the nuts and bolts of the technology and implementation. What I want to do over the next 20 minutes or so is to make sure we keep our eyes on the economic prize. Because I think that the technology we're talking about, some of the capabilities, have opportunities that are easily measured in trillions. And I'll come back to why I think that. And then I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how I think large organizations, both public and private, commercial, should approach the challenges and opportunities around this disruptive technology. So, just as shared context, and a number of speakers have alluded to this thus far, let's understand what we're talking about here. Each year, just in the US, we have about 5.5 million car accidents involving almost 10 million cars. In those car accidents, almost 1 million people are injured, 250,000 are hospitalized, and almost 35,000 die. That's an enormous toll in terms of human suffering. And it's an enormous economic cost as well. Right? So, in statistics released by American Automobile Association, we've estimated that the total direct and opportunity costs caused by those car accidents measures to almost $450 billion. In a recent study just published a couple weeks ago by Morgan Stanley, they put that number closer to $490 billion each year in the US alone. Each year in the US alone. Worldwide, over 1 million people are killed each year by car accidents, and almost 50 million are injured. So you do the math, worldwide, we're talking about trillions of dollars in car accident-related costs. So if the technology we're talking about can eliminate human error, so estimates over the last couple of days have ranged from 80 to over 90% of those car accidents caused by human error. If the technology we're talking about can just cut that down by half, you can do the math as well as I in terms of potential savings. It's just enormous. That's really large motivation, I think, for many people in this room who are concerned primarily with public good and safety. These are some of the numbers from Morgan Stanley. If you look beyond just the direct and opportunity costs of the car accidents, they estimate that the technology, in terms of fuel savings, both in regular driving and reduction of congested driving, and putting a number on the productivity gains resulting from that, can add up to another $800 billion just in the US alone. Enormous numbers. They're almost mind-boggling numbers. And again, let me just say, if we're half right about these, the numbers are, the savings are tremendous, tremendous. Now, there's no saying, if you look at it from a business standpoint, that one man's savings is another man's lost revenue. But you look at the $450 billion we might save in terms of the cost of car accidents, what is that? About $100 billion each year is spent on car parts, service, and repair. We have about 1 million people going to emergency rooms. We're talking about $150 billion in reduced fuel purchases to energy companies, some of which includes taxes to your regulating bodies. Right? So we're not just talking about savings, we're talking about loss. And that's another factor to evaluate here. So if you're sitting in the room and you're in an organization that relies on some of the revenues driven by the current instantiation of the technology, there's many things to think about. Those are the opportunities and the challenges. Now here's another far-reaching disruption that I think is worthwhile talking about and is not yet well understood. So each year we spend about $200 billion in the US on personal and commercial auto premiums. $200 billion on personal and commercial auto premiums. This $200 billion is not factored into the savings numbers that I talked about. But what happens when you have a 50% reduction in the cost of automobile insurance? From an actuarial standpoint, a few years later, you're going to have a 50% reduction in automobile insurance premiums, right? Because that's how insurance works. It's money comes in, the insurance companies make money on the float for a while, and they pay most of it out in terms of losses and claims. So, if you're an insurance executive and you're making money off of $200 billion, and suddenly that industry pool reduces to $100 billion, or $150 billion, or $50 billion, what happens? You have not a very good day, right? Because suddenly you're competing for a much smaller pool. Now, it is true that there is a time window in which accidents go down and insurance premiums stay up. Because as mentioned before, they don't really know what the real results of that technology will be, so they will likely not give you reductions early. But as the actual numbers come in, there's no doubt that those insurance premiums and dollars will go down. So here's another massive disruption. Savings on one hand, challenge on the other. Now, it's not that all car insurance goes away, but it might well be that some of that insurance, much of that insurance, moves from the owner-operator to the manufacturer. We may have, instead of an individual liability situation, we may have a product liability situation. And it's not given that if you're one of the big auto insurers, that you have first dibs on those product warranty premiums. So massive business disruption in that industry. And I think that that's one way of thinking about it. Not all the money goes in terms of savings, but much more of it goes in terms of redistribution to new market leaders. The kinds of companies and organizations that can understand what the new products and services are in that new environment, as opposed to the existing companies. Now, by all rights, those existing companies should have first dibs, right? If you're Progressive or State Farm or Allstate, you know more about insurance than anybody else. So, if you can get into that game early and innovate, you should be the leader in that post-driverless car, self-driving car environment. But it's not here. And if you look further out in terms of the impact of this technology, each year, just in the US, we spend about $2.5 billion in carbon labor revenue, right? Look at tier one suppliers, OEMs, auto dealers, auto financiers, energy companies, parts, sales, repair, warranties, rentals, all that adds up to almost $2.5 trillion. Again, that doesn't all disappear, but much of it goes up for grabs. Much of it moves to the product innovators. So when I think about business opportunities, that is the opportunity, because in reality, one man's lost revenue is another man's opportunity. How can you capture the revenue? How can you capture the business from the existing market leaders as there's a disruptive set of events that redefines customer preferences, customer behavior, and what it means to have great products? So I want to talk a little bit more about the business magnitude of the change we're talking about here by drawing an analogy to the first wave of the internet. So in the late 90s, I sat in the office of the CEO of one of the largest newspaper conglomerates. And I said to him, the internet's going to change your business. And he said to me, no, I'm on top of things. The worst that can happen here is that it'll take some revenue. More likely, it'll be another channel for distribution of my advertising. I'm on top of this. Because he could not imagine the non-incremental change that we were talking about. And what happened between that conversation in 1997 and just a few years later, in 2004, this CEO was forced essentially to sell his organization and dismantle the newspaper that it owned. And just a few years later, by 2010, that industry had 50 years of growth wiped out in terms of lost To the point where, not long ago, the iconic Washington Post, in a bit of irony, was sold to Jeff Bezos of Amazon for $250 million. $250 million for the Washington Post. That's how revenue and value was lost so quickly. Now, one of the things that happens when you have that kind of destruction is that, as I said, it doesn't go away, it just transfers. Right? When you think about the loss in value of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the enormous value created by other players. This is a market value graph of Google versus the Washington Post, New York Times, and S&P 500. Since that conversation I have with that CEO, enormous, much more value was created than was lost. So what I wanted to spend a few minutes doing is talking to you based upon the research, which is captured in the book that the organizers were so generous to pass out to you. What differentiates, based on our research into thousands of companies that both succeeded and failed, what differentiates those people that succeed in the face of disruptive innovation versus those that fail? And if I was to capture it crisply, I would give you 6 words. Innovators think big, start small, and learn fast. The successful innovators think big, start small, and learn fast. And here's what I mean. By thinking big, I mean the innovators, successful innovators, are the ones who are willing to not just think about incremental changes to their business, they're willing to relook at their business. Instead of standing pat on the technology assumptions they're making today, they're willing to look at the wider technology context. What are the emerging technologies that might affect how I operate and how I do business, how I build products, how I interact with customers? They're willing to look at the doomsday scenarios. What's the worst case situation here? How might these changes drive me out of business? Not to surrender their business, but to understand where the threats are. They're willing to start from clean sheets of paper. They're willing to say, let's take everything and reimagine what this business might be like. Not that I can get there tomorrow, but at least I have an endpoint to reach for. That's not just a incremental search function based on where I am today. So they're willing to look at the new technology context, they're willing to embrace their doomsday scenarios, and they're willing to start from a clean sheet of paper. They're willing to dream big. They're willing to say, what are the killer apps I can build that will redefine this category, that will restructure this industry? But the other thing that successful innovators do is that they don't take that big vision and drive home at it as hard as possible. They step back. They say, okay, here's the big idea. Let me break this down to alternative approaches. Let me test and learn. Let me not just make some wild-ass financial assumptions early, bet on the business plan and go. Let me defer that as much as possible. Let me get the data about what works and what doesn't and reduce uncertainty over time. They also say, let me figure out who needs to be on the same page on this. Because as with driverless cars, you can't just build a product and hope everybody comes. You have to make sure that all the various stakeholders, including regulators, consumers, are on board along the way. So if you look at Google, and Alan yesterday estimated they spent about $15 million a year on those 50 engineers. $15 million a year is less than what the OEMs at the same time spent on Super Bowl advertising. $15 million a year is actually less than what it costs to come up with a new Fender. That's the scale we're talking about. So yes, we are talking about Google with lots of cash, but the amounts of money we're talking about is not out of range for any of the players in this industry. And when we're talking about starting small, they're not saying to the world, we have the killer app for this. They're saying, look, we have a dozen cars driving around. You can see them, we can see them. We've got 500,000 miles and no accidents. That's what starting small is, and that's what learning fast is. Right? In Silicon Valley, there's an adage of we eat our own dog food. Right? At Google, Anthony gets driven to work every day by his driverless car. he has to eat his own dog food. And there's another ad that just says a demo is worth 1,000 pages of a business plan. Make it work, show it, make it real. Don't just come up with abstract plans. That's how you learn fast. Now, let me contrast this with companies that fail. Companies that fail typically think small. They assume that a disruptive technology will just be an incremental version of the current world. That's what happened to newspapers. They figured it was another channel of distribution for advertisers. They didn't think about whether or not they had the best technology in that new channel. They didn't think about whether their customers would migrate to that channel first. They didn't think about the value added. Right? They just thought incremental extension of my business, I'm okay. It's a very natural human temptation to say, everything only changes so fast, I can catch up to it as I need. It's a sense of complacency that comes naturally to humans as individuals, and more so to large organizations, because we're optimized by what we do, right? So we think we're right on top of things, we have it under control. Now, one of the things that tends to happen after that stage of complacency about disruptive technologies is a stage of panic, right? Because you're going along, you think you have it under control, and suddenly you don't. So you reach for the best thing you can because you're out of time. This is what killed Blockbuster. They, for years, laughed at the idea of DVDs by mail. They laughed at it. There was a point in the development of Netflix where Reed Hastings felt like he was running out of steam, and he went to meet the guys at Blockbuster. And as he reports, they literally laughed him out of the office. And suddenly, it became real, and Blockbuster rushed to do its own DVD by mail service. Before they got all the operational details right, before they got the economic model right, and they lost hundreds of millions of dollars. They couldn't catch up. So they thought small incrementally, then they had to bet big because they were out of time, and they had no time to learn. That's the model that happens again and again and again. That's why Borders is no longer around. Borders, in the initial days of the internet, thought that it was so inconsequential, they outsourced their online sales to Amazon. So, let me bring this back quickly to Travel Stars. What does it mean to think big, start small, or invest in this environment? We have these great ideas. We have alternative approaches to how this might work. I think there are several things you need to do. First, you need to keep your eyes on the ultimate prize. There is a tremendous amount of human toll and suffering that we can eliminate with this technology, even if we get halfway there. The benefits will come not at the end, but incrementally. So there's tremendous motivation to work on this and to not wait. Second, if you're an organization that's in one of these adjacent industries, you want to make sure you're betting on the right curve. Right? You want to make sure that you're not going to be the Washington Post or newspapers that I was talking about, but that you're in the game so that you have a chance, right, to lead in this new technology, understand what it means to your business models, to evolve your business models as fast as you can. And to do that, you need to think big, start small, very fast. You cannot assume that you can wait. It's not that I want you to bet your entire organizations on an alternative approach. What I do think you need to do is you need to make sure a significant amount of your mind share is spent on understanding the environment, understanding the various scenarios, and understanding what you need to do, rather than taking a wait-and-see attitude. Because ultimately, I think that whether you're a public organization or a commercial organization, your end goal is to avoid being the Washington Post and being amongst the likes of Amazon and Google. You either want to be Amazon or Google, or you want to create the environment where your region, your agency, your state can foster the comparative advantage that comes from fostering